Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this year's CARICOM Energy Month webinar series. This year, as we celebrate CARICOM Energy Month, we're going to have several webinars, this one being the first. So today we will have with us Verena, who will be presenting on vehicles to grid. She has been working with GIZ for a while, and she will make the presentation. The theme for this year's webinar is Invest, Innovate, and Sustain, Leading the Charge in Renewable Energy Frontiers. We're happy to have you here today as we continue our discourse on several energy matters, including e-mobility, which is one of our feature items. And we're here to engage with you, provide you with some information and knowledge as to what is happening around the region. So with that being said, I welcome you again. Thanks for participating as we move into the webinar. I will now hand you over to Brian Constantine, the PO at the CARICOM Secretariat, who will be the moderator for today's session. Brian?
Thank you very much, Sandra. Good morning again.
Naomi.
Okay, so I hear someone is speaking there. I'm not sure if their mics are muted. Yes. President, good morning, everyone. My name is Brian Constantine, Project Officer at the CARICOM Secretariat, and I would like to welcome you to today's session. So before we begin, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping rules to ensure that we have a pleasant experience at the webinar. So what I'm kindly requesting is that you have your microphones muted unless you are asked to speak. So this assists us with minimizing noise in the background and also keeps the focus on the presenter. We're asking that you kindly use the chat box to share whatever thoughts you may have, or if there's any question that you would want to have answered. At the end of the presentation, we will have a dedicated Q&A segment, which is about 15 minutes. And we'll do our best to address the questions within that chat box or those who would wish to speak. For those persons who would like to have their mics on when they're asking the question, we ask that you use the raise hand function so that you can then be asked to unmute your mic and proceed with the question. Just for information purposes, the session will be recorded and we will share those based on requests. And in addition to that, if there's any technical issues, we ask that you communicate to us so that we can urgently see how best we can rectify that. So as Sandra would have mentioned, the webinar forms part of our activities for CARICOM Energy Month. And Ms. Verena Arroz is very much willing and able to support us in in one of these activities. Now, Verena is an international expert in sustainable transport and electric mobility with over 15 years of experience across Latin America, the Caribbean, Asia, and Europe. She has led technical and financial feasibility studies for electric bus and low carbon transport projects financed by institutions such as GCF, the Asian Development Bank, and the EU. She's currently based in Costa Rica and works with GIZ on the implementation of the country's first large-scale electric bus financing mechanism, combining public-private resources to accelerate fleet electrification. Our work focuses on developing innovating financing structures, policy frameworks, and business models that integrate resilience, climate adaptation, and energy transition goals. She holds a master's degree in mechanical engineering and is currently pursuing an executive master's in finance at INCAE Business School. Verena, we're truly honored to have you here today to share your insights on the topic. And without further ado, I would just like to like you all to join me in welcoming Verena. I'm so sorry for mixing up your name, but Verena, as she takes us through her presentation today on electric buses as climate resilient assets, the V2G potential for energy security on islands. You have the floor, Verena. Please proceed.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Brian, for being here. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm very excited to be participating, to be the first one in this very interesting webinar series. And on such an interesting topic. I wasn't really, to be honest, I wasn't aware that I was going to be the one opening this interesting webinar series. But I'm happy to share the floor with you and to share some insights about electric mobility. I do think that it is an exciting topic to look upon, coming from especially for islands and especially for the electric sector. So maybe I'll just tell you a little bit about how and why I wanted to give this presentation, because as Brian said, I'm currently working on something else in GIZ Costa Rica, but I had some very interesting consulting work some years ago in Dominica, and the project that was on behalf of the GCF, of the Green Climate Fund. And there it was a pretty ambitious project that we were developing there. It was the proposal to make the whole island basically fully energy independent. And that also meant electrifying the whole fleet of the island, which is actually, if you think about it, not that hard, because small islands normally only have like 2,000 vehicles or the sort, and the distances that are needed there are really short, because the island is not very big, so you don't need like this big charging infrastructure. And while we were there, we also thought, okay, listen, why don't we think one step further and start thinking out of the box? How can we use projects like this to actually jumpstart innovating technology, which is still on a pilot phase, such as vehicle to grid, for example. So that is how we came across this proposal of having electric buses as climate resilient assets. Can you still see my presentation?
Hi, Verena. Yes, I think we were seeing another screen that you had a little write-up as well to the side of it. So maybe if you just full screen the presentation, that's...
Oh, that's
yes,
okay.
you're seeing your remarks.
Is it?
Yeah.
Is it back?
Yes, but we are also seeing your a second screen where you have your introduction and timing and so on.
Okay, let me
Yes.
see.
Yes, if you can move
Because
that screen to another window.
yes, because I thought it was only the presentation. Here now?
Okay. Yes, this is perfect.
Okay, good.
Good.
Good. Okay, now let me go ahead. Wait. Okay. So what I want to share with you today is just to have maybe I do not want to dwell upon the climate vulnerability so much, just a brief introduction, because, well, I mean, unfortunately, the region has again been hit by a pretty severe hurricanes, and my thoughts are really with the people in Jamaica right now after this devastation of Melissa. So I really do not want to dwell on that so much, but then we will go on about the role of electric buses and what vehicle to grid could imply in scenarios such as these. And then we'll look into some global case studies where there can be financing and why this is an interesting opportunity for accessing finance. And then what are already the opportunities in the Caribbean, because I do know that there are already some very interesting cases, like in Barbados, for example, with electric buses. And then we can open up for the discussion about the topic. So, yeah, as I said, I do not want to dwell on this so much, but it is obvious that climate risks and energy vulnerability in the Caribbean are very much on top of the agenda, especially in this era right now. There were nearly 800 climatic events between 2000 and 2023. The storms, hurricanes keep getting stronger, and the devastation keeps getting even more, devastating. And also the damages in some cases have exceeded 181 billion US dollars. The losses are immeasurable, and also obviously the damages done to livelihood itself. So this is obviously a topic that has been addressed so much in so many other contexts about building back more resilient, when I was at the CARICOM conference, there was so much talk about having more resilient microgrids, etc. So it was really interesting to see what is already happening and to be prepared to minimize the losses after such devastation happens. But also, I mean, I do know that we are here in an energy-like context, but obviously the damage also hits on the transport systems, and it's pretty hard. What happens after a hurricane, you know it better than I do, is that normally you do not have that. Well, I mean, obviously you get a cutoff from the grid and from the electricity, but also from fuel supply, because bridges are damaged, because bus depots and transport corridors are often flood exposed. You cannot really circulate that much between one place and another. Also, normally ports get damaged as well, which makes it pretty difficult also for tankers to deliver sometimes fuel when it is needed. So it's not only the damage on the electricity grid, which complicates everything, but also on the transportation system. On the electricity grid itself, we know that the power grid recovery timelines vary a lot, but for example, in San Martin, it took about 2 months to restore full electric power. And also recently in Puerto Rico, those were like 70 days. So the outages are pretty long. And what happens immediately after those hurricanes hit is that people are completely disconnected, and this is particularly dangerous, especially like in critical facilities such as hospitals and obviously also shelters. So we can see that it varies, even though it doesn't really, I mean, even though you have microgrids, even though you build back better, I mean, the thing is, after seeing the devastations, for example, that just recently happened in Jamaica, you cannot really rely on those systems to hold on those strong wind powers. So you need to have some other means of resilience to attend the critical facilities shortly after the disaster hits. What happens, obviously, when roads are blocked, diesel supplies cannot reach the generators, and the islands really depend on whatever energy is left on site, basically. But what we thought is, what if a local bus fleet could actually store some of the energy and feed it back into emergency shelters or hospitals? I think hospitals is more difficult because they have isolated grids, but most definitely shelters are the one thing where you can feed in directly the electricity, and you can really have the fuel supply, the limited fuel supply that is left on the island, to actually supply the real critical facilities such as hospitals, for example, and start feeding in the generators where it's needed. And that is how we started to think, okay, this technology is kind of it's pretty interesting to look into for the islands, as not only as an innovative matter or as a energy or peak shaving mechanism, but also as a resilience mechanism. So what is vehicle? Yes. And this is basically the opportunity. I mean, if you can see, well, these are large buses. I do know that the islands normally have like the small mini buses as a transportation fleet, but I did see like the ones in Barbados. Those are 12-meter buses. And I don't know the battery capacity, but normally these kinds of buses, they can store up to 350 kilowatt hour of batteries. I think the ones that are in Barbados are smaller, but still it's 250 kilowatt hour. And that would last about 3 days of lighting for 50 homes. That's like my rough calculations. And if you use it wisely, you can actually feed in energy into emergency shelters for several days. The advantage too is that they can go to where there are maybe some undamaged grids, microgrids, solar power, etc., and bring back the energy to where it is actually needed. So what you do have is like a rolling energy stock, which is also, by the way, having all the benefits of being an electric zero emission bus fleet. So how does it work? Vehicle to grid. It means that electric vehicles can discharge energy back into the grid. It allows a bidirectional flow. This is not an easy topic, and maybe we can look into it if somebody has more questions about it, because you need some communication protocols in order to make it flow directly and also resistance free. And it flows from the grid, basically from the grid to the vehicle, and from the vehicle back to the grid or to the building or even a home. So what we can see here is you have vehicle to home. That one is actually being already implemented, for example, in Europe with private cars. Because what happens is you charge your vehicle fully, and if you have, for example, a smart charger, you can also plug your vehicle back into your home and supply your home with energy when energy is cheaper. For that, you need to have smart meters in place. You need to have variable energy prices. For example, where I live in Costa Rica, it doesn't make much sense because we are fully renewable. Energy prices are stable. We do have differentiated prices in the evening. When it's cheaper. But for example, in Europe, where you have energy being sorted from different sources all the time, prices in real time actually fluctuate. So if you have smart meters and you have your vehicle connected to the grid, your smart meter will decide where to take its energy from. So when electricity is generated at a high price, then it can just discharge energy from your vehicle. And that is already happening in some places in Europe, but it needs to be regulated still. And that is still something that is in progress. Then we also have like vehicle to load. That is something. With that, you can charge basically everything. So people have like campers, for example. So you can basically have you can go camping and be in the mountains and basically have electricity wherever you are. And the more complicated one is the one that we're talking right now. It's vehicle to grid. So when the electricity demand and prices are low, the bus is charged, normally in the evening. And when demand peaks or a blackout occurs, they can discharge back into the grids. So there are many benefits to that. You have a greater grid stability, especially if you have, for example, a lot of solar, which is not very stable. That could also help to harmonize the frequencies too. You have distributed storage across the city. You do know that battery facilities are expensive. And here you don't need to see it basically as an investment into a separate storage facility. You do see it as an investment into a more modern, a cleaner transportation system with the co-benefit that is also a storage system. And you do have potential financial returns to the fleet operators, but that one is tricky because that really depends on the regulation, and that is something that needs to be worked on, and it takes some time because the grid operator would have to pay back to the electricity that's being fed back into the grid. So that is one of the bigger limitations right now. That is why I do not contemplate it for this presentation, because this is actually seen as a resilience measure, as a first response measure. So from what I have seen is that when tragedy strikes, everybody, like the community, really holds back together. And I do not think that the operator would be like, okay, yeah, but I want to get like my feedback. That is not going to happen. Everybody helps out. And so if you see it as an option like that, it's not necessary to have tariffs to feed the electricity back into the grid in place, but that is something to be seen in the future to be working on. Okay. So, as I told you, there are already some, like this is not new. Vehicle to grid is being researched for years now, especially well, all across developed nation in Europe and the States, and you do need regulations. So there are different standards that can be copied around other nations. There's like there are new models that are capable of they're capable of actually having this bidirectional use. The infrastructure remains a key challenge because you do need different kind of chargers, you do need grid upgrades, you need communication software, and it's pricey. It's not the normal charging infrastructure you need for electric vehicles. The business models are still evolving. As I told you, the tariffs to feed electricity back into the grids are not in place in many places yet. And but there is already regulations that it will happen. For example, in the EU, they will have it in place, and it will be mandatory to have the regulations on 2027. This does not mean that everyone who owns an electric vehicle needs to have a bidirectional charger. It's completely optional, but if they want to, they will know that all the protocols, safety protocols, communication protocols are in place. So maybe this is like the more interesting part, the case studies that already are happening. So the idea of having electric vehicles as a first response model is not new. This has been already put in place in Japan, for example. So in this case study, the Japan pioneered this project with Nissan Leafs. Those are small automobiles, you know. I mean, we're not talking about big energy storage like buses, but they had enough energy to supply emergency energy needs after the earthquake. So it was a program. It was the first program of its kind, where 5,000 vehicles registered in something that was called Nissan Energy Share, and they supplied power during blackouts and typhoons. So each car could provide about 10 kilowatt hours to homes or shelters through vehicle to home systems in this case. So it proved that decentralized vehicle-based support networks work, and it inspired similar disaster response schemes basically everywhere. And this other case study, this one I really do like because, well, this one is all across the United States. It was done with support from the World Resource Institute. And as you know, like electric school buses, they're interesting because they're not rolling all the time. They go and pick up the kids at school, and then they're parked, and then they're deployed again to bring the kids back home. So in comparison to public transportation fleet, they idle a lot. So there you have like this big investment into a rolling stock that, yes, has all the benefits of a electric transportation means. It has zero emissions, it has zero noise, but it's more expensive and it's parked most of the time. So here they came up with the idea of piloting a vehicle-to-grid system to actually enable peak shaving. They had 30 pilot projects in the US in over 15 states, and they tested it with the different vehicle-to-grid school buses. And for example, in Virginia, they had like 50 buses to inject up to 3 megawatts back into the grid. And others, like for example, in Maryland, they reported that they had savings of 24,000 US dollars per year in their energy because of what I had told you. They feed it back in when, for example, during at noon, when their kids, for example, they have lunch, and that is like an energy peak hour. So that's when the electricity prices go up. And then during that time, buses can charge back energy into the grid. So it actually lowers their electricity bill. So that is like one benefit. And it has actually, well, worked quite well, especially also, like, for example, during heat waves. You need to power up the AC, etc. So there you have the buses that have oversized batteries for their actual needs, and they can supply that additional energy into the grid. There are some downsides to it still, because the batteries sometimes have like more damages after those discharging processes, but all these things are being optimized, and in the end you have to weigh in the benefits against the the disadvantages, obviously. So what I do see, there are some great emerging opportunities also in the Caribbean. And why do I say that? Well, obviously, I think you do know about the Barbados electrification plan. Here I found a picture from the Ministry of Transportation. I saw that they got a donation just recently of 30 new electric buses from the Chinese government, and that they now have 83 electric buses. They're not vehicle to grid able, but what I want to say is that it shows that a small island with vision can already transition to a fully electric fleet. Like, for example, here in Costa Rica, we are 5 million people, and we are, as I said, fully renewables. If you have questions on that, I can also comment on that as well. We have a lot of hydropower, of course, but we do not have such a big fleet of electric buses, even though we could. And so really that is a big shout out to Barbados, because they have taken a big step towards electrifying their fleet, and that is a good sign that it can be possible to even further develop these kinds of strategies and have them as a resilience measure too. And also, for example, I remember, like what I told you at the beginning of my presentation, is like Dominica's post-Maria resilience strategy, that they wanted to be, that is on the policy side, that they wanted to be like the first and completely resilient nation, and it's pretty ambitious. And having, for example, this V2G technology or component into their resilient plan is also one big potential to make it like even more solid. I'm sure there are other initiatives where we can talk about. I think I think in Jamaica they were piloting also a school bus project with electric buses. So the signs are there and the potentials are there, and I think the willingness is also there across the different islands. Maybe this is also interesting. Why is this interesting for financing options? Normally, and maybe we can also discuss this a little bit further, if we think about transport projects themselves, those projects are always very innovative and fine. But having the resilience component embedded into transport systems is not really that easy, because, I mean, there's only so much you can do to make transportation infrastructure more resilient. Roads are still going to flood, and well, I mean, bridges can be built back stronger, obviously, but in terms of the rolling stock, there's only so much you can do. And as you might know already, financing institutions, they do like to finance what they call cross-cutting projects, that they tackle mitigation and adaptation. And so here, if you put together like these kinds of projects that tackle mitigation, through electric mobility, but also have a resilience component such as the vehicle to grid component for buses. Those kinds of projects are very attractive for the multilateral banks and donors because they have also an innovative component and a resilience component. So here on this table, you can see what they are willing to do. They give like more technical assistance grants. They give loans plus grants. For example, they can give you how it would look like. They would give you like a loan to electrify your fleet, but then they would also give you a grant to start proving this vehicle to grid technology because it's obviously still more expensive. Here, these would be like the benefits. The most climate finance programs require clear adaptation co-benefits. If we position electric buses as rolling energy assets that supports emergency response, they meet that criterion. And this unlocks like this blended financing structures with grants, guarantees, concessional loans, or even result-based payments for the resilience services. I do think that is some interesting financing mechanism to look into. And another idea is you can measure the avoided outage costs. I didn't go into detail that much because I think that's always really depends on how much on how long the outage is. I think it goes up exponentially, especially if you see it like, for example, in hospitals. How much does an hour of power outage cost for a hospital? It's ridiculous, and there you can really mitigate it, and then you get like some return back on this resilience investment. So yeah, I'm coming to an end of my presentation now. How would it look like? Obviously, we still need a piloting phase. And when I'm talking about a piloting phase, I'm thinking about 1 or 2 V2G ready buses on islands because your fleets aren't that big. And that way you can really see what the benefits are when you return energy back into the grid, be it for peak shaving and hopefully not for emergency response. But so what I would suggest is in this piloting phase, if you have like an electrification component in your climate change roadmaps, etc., you can include a small pilot phase where you have these bidirectional chargers placed in strategic facilities, being namely shelters or schools that function as shelters. And that is also one of the benefits of having like the school buses electrified, and because many times schools with their gyms, etc., are used as shelters, and there you can have in place a bidirectional vehicle to grid charger, and you can pilot it and see what the revenues are. And also during normal outages, it doesn't need to be like during a disaster or the like, right? And then you start working, or in parallel, one starts working on the regulatory setup, defining the grid code, defining the tariffs in terms as such, so that it's also attractive for the operator to have that investment as well. And then you can scale it up, namely in 4-5 years from now, into the National Resilience Plan, and you can actually have it as well, as I said, as rolling energy facilities. Which is important is to foster collaboration between the utilities, transport agencies, and donors, to have like this whole transparency and the collaboration, because it's not an easy topic to implement. There's still a lot of barriers, mainly costs, to be tackled, and a smart collaboration is really needed between transport entities, between the utilities, and between the financing mechanism. So What do I see here? Well, this is an AI generated image here. This is the electric bus feeding electricity back into the emergency shelter. What we see is it's a node of resilience, and integrating transport policy with energy is really, I mean, I think it's beneficial for both. The challenge generally with electric mobility, and maybe you can correct me on that as well, is that it's very cross-cutting, not only for vehicle to grid, but electric mobility itself. It's cross-cutting. Who is in charge of implementing it? Who will implement the charging station? Is it the Ministry of Transport? Is it the utility, etc.? So the collaboration needs to be really tight, and the regulation that is put in place too. And well, and I cannot really state it enough that that electric buses are a resilience infrastructure, and it also, well, in the end, you can have like this smart transportation system, clean, zero emission, but also as a battery for resilience and energy storage as well, and that will add up. That will add value in the end to your electrification project. So yes, hopefully I give you some food for thought. Feel free to ask everything about, I know this is like, I wasn't really sure how far on electric mobility plans are in place in the different islands. I know it varies a lot. I covered a little bit Barbados, but I do know that other islands are struggling, especially because of the high electricity prices that you have in many of the islands. So when it comes to electrifying the fleet, it needs to be really a comprehensive model with obviously solar and battery in place. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, with some of the electricity prices that I have seen on the islands, it does not make any sense to actually add an electric vehicle to your home. So it needs to be a comprehensive strategy of islands actually being fully independent, energetically speaking, importing less fuel as a whole, and in the end, then also obviously more resilient. Feel free to ask everything you want. Here's also my contact. You can email me, you can call me, and I'm open for questions and some discussions. Maybe also somebody would like to share about their know-how and insights about how electric mobility is going on their islands or from their utilities perspective. So Brian, I don't know if you can open the mic for the rest of the people. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Verena, for a very insightful presentation. You've actually given us a lot to think about in terms of the content that was shared, in terms of our efforts to build climate resilience and also to improve energy security, especially in island nations. So I will now like to open the floor for questions from those who are in attendance. You can drop your question in the comment box, or you can indicate by raising your hand or unmuting your mics, and Verena will be more than willing to accommodate your questions. We'd also like to hear from you in terms of your thoughts. It doesn't have to be a question. If you want to share from your member state, what isn't going within the e-mobility sector. So if I would like to start the ball rolling, obviously, yes, we have unique challenges. It is primarily based on our locations. So with this technology, what are the likely challenges that we may experience in integrating vehicle to grid within our current infrastructure on our island nations? So just some of the challenges that are likely to be seen on island nations with our unique context.
Okay, so there are several challenges. First, regarding the grid capacity, that would be probably the first one that I do see. Grid capacity and technical constraints, maybe because you need to do some upgrades on the grids. Islands have isolated grids. They're small, so I mean, I think you can see it already when you start implementing solar panels and the like the influx of having more renewable and variable energy being fed into the grid is already facing some challenges. So having vehicle to grid is also it presents more or less the more or less similar challenges. Then what you do have, I don't know if it's in all the islands, but you do have like some frequency fluctuations in general over the grids, and so you need to stabilize the grid first in order for it to capture it back. That's why I do not see the buses feeding energy back into the grid itself, but directly into where it's needed, into the shelters, because that way this grid stability and the fluctuations that you have generally on the grid, they don't present itself as a challenge that much. And what else? Then the other challenges are regulatory and market barriers. If you have it, and that really depends. Normally, like the utilities are state-owned, and having private players put back into like selling electricity back into the grid, or feeding electricity back into the grid, has some regulatory barriers. There's no legal framework for it, so that is something you might need to work on as well. But I think that is why I presented it as a first response measure, because that way you can bypass these regulatory things that need to be put in place. It's different if you're thinking of using it like in the project that I had mentioned from the electric buses in the US, where they feed it directly in order to pay less for the energy. That might pose some challenges there, because I do know that there are some interests there. The electric company would not like to have I mean, some clients that, and it's the same here in Costa Rica, and I think you have the same in some islands with solar rooftop, for example, that there you can find some barriers to that they top the electricity that is fed back into the grid. So there, I think on the regulatory basis, there needs to be some openings there. And what else?
So we have a second question here.
Oh, good. Okay.
Are there any specialized skills that member states will need to invest to implement electric buses?
Are there special? Sorry.
Are there specialized skills that member states will need to invest?
That's a good question. Thank you. So maybe the question goes back. I do not think that there are any specialized skills to invest, because I think the skills you would be acquiring throughout the investment project itself. So how it normally works is, depending on where you're at, how it normally works is if the utility, together with the, let's say, the public transport authority, they want to have like an electrification project, you ask, I mean, I think you have access to plenty of other funds and donations through multilateral banks, and normally you get direct assistance and capacity building throughout the investment project. And I think that is the way it should be. Like you build the skills along with the funding that flows into building already and transitioning to the electric fleet. You need to have in place electromechanical engineers. You need to have maintenance to the charging infrastructure, and that is not an easy task. I'm not gonna lie. Like, for example, electric vehicles do have less maintenance than internal combustion vehicles, because they have less mobile parts. So you do not have to have like oil changes or anything like that. So you have less operating costs there. But when something happens, like for example with a battery computer or the like, you need very specialized skills. Normally, if you buy, for example, in Barbados, they have like a BYD fleet, I saw, and normally they come with somebody from the plant that comes and gives the capacity building on maintenance of electric buses and charging infrastructure. So yes, you do need skills, but it shouldn't be a barrier to the investment, because normally the capacity building comes with the investment itself. Thank you.
Thank you. We have another question here from Mr. Ramcharan. He's asking, what are the technical requirements or specifications for the electric buses to act as a generator?
There are several technical requirements and specifications. Not all buses can act as a generator, as I mentioned. So if you, that's why I said, like, during the pilot phase, let's say you're gonna buy like 50 electric buses, not all of them are going to be vehicle to grid, because it makes it so much more expensive. They're more expensive. They need to have other securities in place, because since you're charging, I mean, those are high voltages in part, so you have to have like other protocols and safety protocols in place, not only in the bus but also in the charger. So not the chargers themselves, not most of them are not bidirectional. They're not equipped to get the electricity flux back into it, and that is one of the most challenging parts of implementing it. So there are several norms in place. I'd be happy to provide you with that, because in Europe they're already working on that, and to make it as safe as possible. So I can send it to Brian, and like the studies that I have been working on or researching on, and then there you can see all the technical requirements, because those are several. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for that question. And I just want to squeeze another question in, because you would have mentioned there's a cost implication to this as well. So in terms of economic benefits, do you have anything that you can share on that?
I would love to have something that we can share on that. I do not. I would be lying, because as I said, it varies a lot, and it really depends on a lot of variable costs too. As I mentioned before, electric mobility in an island that generates electricity mainly with diesel gensets, it doesn't make any sense. So you need to see it as a whole. You need to see it with solar power, with microgrids, with also obviously wind, etc. Whatever you're thinking in terms of implementing renewable energy, then where you actually can see the cost of the kilowatt hour drop and maybe you can share some of the projects that you have been working on. If you have actually seen some release on the electricity tariffs through the implementation of renewables, then you can have like a higher cost benefit too. And I do think that would be like a very interesting project too. I mean, maybe Brian and I can continue talking with support of the GIZ to actually model what the cost benefit would be in different islands, because I do think that's a very good question, but I do not have it. Sorry.
Okay, so we are also streaming on social media, so we have some questions coming in there. So I'll try to go through them as quickly as I can. So, can't alternative solar energy motorized transport? This is coming from Andrew.
Yes, the answer is yes. I mean, and it should be like, okay, because the question is ambiguous. So if you have like solar powers, for example, on bus depots, right? There you would need to charge your bus obviously during the early day times, because normally what happens with buses is you charge them during the evening. Then you're going to need that is why you need to work with the utilities, because the buses are operating during daytime. So if you have like solar panels on your depot, you cannot do anything without it, because you plug in your bus during the evening and there's no sun. So what you need is also batteries in place there to charge also during the nighttime, to actually use the benefits of having cheaper solar power. That is one option. The other option is that if bus depots are normally pretty large and they have rooftops, so you can also have like distributed energy itself, and then you just feed in back from the grid when you're charging during the night with a differentiated tariff because it's off peak time. And the other opportunity, and I don't know if that was what you're referring to, is to have actual solar panels on the vehicles themselves. That is also an option, but not really for buses or land transportation vehicles, where it's attractive, and that is also something which is attractive, especially for islands, is on boats and that or ferries, for example, because and there are several, and especially for tourism, for example, if you have like a diving boat and you have solar panels there, you can go on diving without damaging marine biology, marine life, because you don't have the diesel outages from your engine, and you can charge your tourists even more because you're saying you're not harming the environment for your wonderful dive site. And with the solar panel, while the boat is idling, and the divers are like diving, it charges back energy into the battery, and you can go silently back to the coast. So there are several ways of having solar power powering transport.
Okay, thank you for that. I see Ronald asking to have his mic unmuted. Please proceed, Ronald.
Yes, hi everybody. Marina, very good presentation. I was watching this on LinkedIn and I was like, how do I get in here? How do I unmute? I had to go in here and actually go to the Zoom meeting. But yeah, I'm originally from Guyana, and so I'm very much aware of the issues that the CARICOM community faces when it comes to power, right? The V2G, I think it's a great alternative. Of course, you got to have a high demand on the grid for it to actually work and function, which is something that you have to when you start thinking how many vehicles are we actually charging right now in the island to hit back the grid? How advanced is the grid? Are the grids updated? Are the grids ready to take on these challenges? So I think I've been trying to contact a lot the I'm planning to go to Brussels this month to talk to the ambassador of Guyana here in the EU, to basically talk about energy efficiency in the Caribbean, not just Guyana, but in the Caribbean, because it's extremely important that our countries don't. I've been to Guyana and the power goes out for 2 through 3 hours. So, like, Verena was saying, imagine you're a surgeon and I don't know, you're doing some medical procedure, and then, the power goes off, and that can immediately impact the life of a person, because you have the generators that can go in, but how much fuel is going to be how much is this fuel going to cost, so one example I would take is, for example, is what they're doing, for example, in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia with Mohammed bin Salman, that they're using their resources, their oil resources, to reinvest in renewable energies, in tech, to prepare the people. Like Verena was saying just a couple of minutes ago, yeah, you buy this fleet of buses, but somebody from BYD is going to come over here and train you, and it has to be like that, because you're going to need specialized technicians. So this is just not we're not just tackling an issue on energy optimization, but we're also tackling an issue to create more jobs, to create jobs that are better paid for. So this is something the government definitely needs to look into, and see and take baby steps. I like in your presentation, Verena, how you said you can start with one bus, and then you start with a fleet of 5, and so on. For example, an idea could be, for the tourists, you can have like RVs that are electrical, and have different charging stations across the island, and instead of using fuel, you can use this, and then but for that, you're also going to need an NFC payment system. So all this, all this software, these things, they need to be well interconnected. And also, you want to collect the data. You want to collect the data. How much usage are we getting from this? How much how much can we increment or decrease on this? What is the impact this is actually that this is actually playing in our country, in our nation? Hurricanes, that's another one. I think that this is something that I would personally, and for Verena can assist me, I would. This is definitely something I would like to tackle with the CARICOM and come with a very detailed proposal on how we can start integrating these new technologies. Because Verena spoke about the U.S. I work a lot with the U.S. I open up businesses in the U.S. and believe me, they are like 15 years behind us here in Europe. And for example, here in Europe, it is becoming very, very common to see electric vehicles, hydrogen buses. That's another one. I represent a company that makes hydrogen fuel pumps for hydrogen buses. Which right now I know the electrolytes and these things are a little bit more expensive, but they are zero emissions, and you don't depend on electricity for this so much. So that's another alternative. Also, electrification doesn't have to mean just buses and cars and RVs. It could also mean trains. We don't have any trains in the Caribbean. We used to have a train station down in Guyana and Georgetown, and now it's disappeared. It's been gone for like about 40, 50 years. So these are, these islands are like small hubs that if we get the right people and use the resources correctly, we can definitely be an example of how you can integrate new technologies with countries that have little income and have a green impact on the planet. That's basically what I wanted to say.
Thank you so much, Ronald,
thank you
for
very
your
much contribution. Yes,
No problem.
yes.
very insightful. So I have just about three questions remaining. We'll try to wrap this up, and I'm kindly asking the participants and the moderators, sorry, not the moderator, the participant and the presenter, Mr. Rouse, to just allow us the 10 minutes time to fill these questions. So I think this is more of a comment from Mark. A major challenge to transportation fleet electrification in the relationship between the intermediary and the manufacturers. In many instances, the cost benefits are not passed on to consumers. An example is the cost of a $15,000 EV from China and the cost to consumers in the Caribbean countries. I think he's talking about the scaling up of or
No,
the
that's true. I mean,
Yeah.
it is a valid point.
Mhm.
And there, like here in Costa Rica, for example, we have a lot of private electric vehicles, a lot of Chinese ones, and we have tax cuts for the EVs. And at the beginning, when they started with that, with the tax cuts, you would see that the importers would actually they wouldn't pass on the benefits to the consumer themselves. I mean, they would use it as revenue with the excuse of saying, well, I mean, it's not that much scale, so for us we don't sell as many EVs as gasoline ones, so it's harder for us to import them, etc. those are excuses. And now, I mean, but it happens at the beginning when you start rolling out incentives for EVs in general. The ones that are actually taking down the profits are the distributors and the importers. Right now, after a couple of years now in Costa Rica, you can get really cheap EVs here, and now we're actually flooded by them. But it's a good thing. It's a good thing. I mean, it doesn't really make any difference on the traffic that we have, but it's a good thing that we have at least they don't pollute as much. And yes, so after some years, you will see that that they are actually, you can have them at some accessible point, but you have to tackle on the lobby for that. Yeah.
Yes. So we have a question here from Sandra Britton. What role can private sector play in scaling up this technology in the Caribbean?
Oh, a huge role. It's actually, and thank you for having that. Thank you for asking that question. Yes, the private sector can play a huge role, but in the end, it really depends on the structures you have for your electricity provision. If it's very centralized, if it's just the state utility that is going to provide the electricity and the charging infrastructure, then the private sector can only do so much. If you have it more openly, and if you can have like some other business models where you can have like private equity investing, for example, in part of the charging infrastructure, or having them investing in the whole fleet itself, for example, for a transportation sector, you can actually accelerate the transition that much faster. In the transport sector itself, I think it really depends on the different islands, because, for example, Barbados had the advantage that the bus fleet is state owned and they have a pretty big bus fleet. But for example, in Dominica, you have the minibuses, and everybody, like, I mean, and one driver owns the minibus and he drives it back home and it's parked there. So when it comes to the charging facility and the investment itself, it gets more challenging. If you have like private operators, also like, for example, for the tourism or for the distribution, I do think that the private sector, they would benefit so much, because your electricity prices are normally so high that they are happily to invest in solar and with the whole electric fleet, because also fuel imports are very expensive. So I do see a big role also working together with them.
Yes, yes, and I believe you may have touched on this, but can you elaborate a bit further in terms of the role that government can play as well to support or incentivize the adoption of the V2G capabilities?
Yes. I mean, first you would have to have a solid energy transition plan in place, and then a solid resilience plan in place, and then also having like your electric mobility plan too. And in terms of, as I mentioned, in your case, it cannot happen without a big insertion of renewable energies and in lowering the tariffs. Otherwise, it's not feasible. And lowering the electricity tariffs. Otherwise, yes, I mean, like I will never forget, like when I was in Dominica, and one lady told me, listen, I mean, I need to unplug my fridge sometimes. And I was like, and I was there talking about electric cars, and I actually felt bad. But that's the reality as it is in some countries, yes. And sometimes electricity is so unaffordable that you cannot even think about buying an electric car. So the government needs to play a huge role into having renewable, accessible electricity, and not being so dependent on the fuel importation in the long term.
Okay, thank you. And I have another question here from Joel. Do you think that biocrude produced from woody biomass can be used as an alternative fuel source to fill the gap that are available in sustainable fuel sources?
Yes, but I do not see it competing necessarily with electric mobility. I think biomass is more like for cauldrons. That's where I see it, to be honest. I think if you have a renewable grid, then I don't see why you should feed into the grid, like why you should replace bunker fuel or diesel with biomass. I see it more like in an industrialized way to replacing diesel, mainly in cauldrons. But I mean, I get this question sometimes, and when I'm talking about electric mobility, and I think biofuels is a whole other discussion and a whole other area, which is also interesting. And I think there are other uses, for example, biomethane from dumpsters and manure, etc., that can also be used in alternative things. But I think in electric mobility, you should stick to the renewables and to the grid that you have in place. Yeah, and it's
Okay.
my personal opinion. Yeah.
Yeah, so we have one final question, and it comes from Marie, and she's asking about solar energy in Guadeloupe and other Caribbean countries. I believe it's in terms of replicating and scalability in the other island states as it relates to the V2G capabilities.
I think it's pretty much independent from every island. I think every island has a good capability of generating a great deal of solar energy. I'm not sure about the electricity matrix in Guadeloupe, for example. I think each island presents other different challenges. I do know, for example, in Dominica that they have more geothermal power, and that it's very hilly, and sometimes they don't have like the direct influx from the sun. But normally in the other islands that are very flat, the potential of generating solar energy is pretty high, and I'm guessing Guadeloupe is not the exception to that. So I think the way to go is actually to look into the other project, that there are several projects. I think Puerto Rico had a pretty ambitious solar panel. I think also in the Dominican Republic, solar power is being implemented at a very high scale right now across the island, and I think it's worth taking a look and having a peer-to-peer exchange directly with other utilities.
Okay, thank you very much, Verena. So on behalf of the organizing team, I'd like to extend our sincere thanks to you for your insightful and thought-provoking discussion on electric buses as climate resilient assets and the exciting potential that it offers for energy security on islands. To all our attendees, I would like to thank you for joining us and for your active participation. Your engagement and interest in sustainable energy solutions are what drives our conversation forward. We hope that today's session has sparked new ideas and collaborations that will help advance resilience and energy innovation across the community. So let us work together to ensure that we have a cleaner, more secure, climate resilient future. Until our next webinar, take care and stay connected. Verena, thanks again.
Thank you for your invitation, Brian, and thank you everybody for your interesting questions.
Yes, and thank you for sharing your contact details. I'm sure you're willing to facilitate if there are any other questions. They can use the information provided there. So thanks again. Have a good day, everyone. Bye-bye.
Have a good day. Bye.